Good morning, good afternoon, good evening guys, gals and gentlebods, and welcome back to the shed, the workshop. Obviously we're with Morty, so we're in the big shop. Just a quick update on where we've got to. So I've completed the fuel tank installation and its enclosure, and I've got the fuel pump mounted. I'll show you that in a moment. The bumpers are in a pretty poor condition. They've always looked a bit twisted. I've taken the rear bumper off to gain access to do the welding, and it's tired. So I've bitten the bullet and I bought a pair of fiberglass bumpers. So I'll show you those in a moment or two. They've got to be painted, and I've got to transfer all of the mounting brackets from the old bumpers to those. Biggest problem with that is the old bumpers and their brackets are pretty rusty, so I'm having a bit of difficulty getting some of the parts off. The bits that I have got off, I'm sandblasting to clean, get rid of all the rust, so they can be painted, treated and assembled to the new bumpers. So I'll show you where we got to with the fuel tank and then give you a bit of an update on what's next. Right, so here's the new fuel tank enclosure. And the tank itself inside. So the lid comes out easily for refueling. That's it, goes back in easily if you're using your proper hand. And then the lid goes on nicely and nice and secure, and the boot floor's all done. All of the holes are plugged, all of the weld repairs are completed, and a coat of paint just to keep it tidy. I'll show you underneath in a moment. Right, so here's the underside of the fuel tank. You can see the mounting brackets that I made, and I've got some nice braided fuel hose to a filter through to the pump, and that goes, then feeds off up to the carburetor. I've got a little switch in the boot so that I can isolate the fuel pump with the ignition on. If I was doing something, for example, I've got mappable ignition system on this, so if I was doing something altering the map of the ignition, I don't want the fuel pump sitting there ticking away while I've got the ignition on. So I can turn the pump off and do whatever I've got to do. So that's all that. Now I have found a bit more welding that needs doing. I'll show you that next. There is also a bit of remedial work needed on this area. This is the rear valance flange. That's just scabby. That's actually holed through. So what I need, it's got a skim of filler on it all the way across basically. So what I need to do is strip that back to bare metal, see how bad it is, establish whether it needs weld repairs. I think that bit will. More than I really wanted to do. I didn't want to have to touch this back end, but it is what it is. So that's a job for another day. The reason the passenger seat belt is hanging there, I'll show you in a second. If we come round to the passenger side. Now, I've always had a bit of concern over the passenger floor because it always looked a bit crusty, and I'm not sure crusty does it justice. So I've got a hole there, got a hole here. That's the main chassis rail underneath. Got a dirty great hole here, more holes here, there's been a repair done here, but it's pretty much, I don't know, looks like a bit of a bean can. Now the reason the seat belt is hanging loose is because I'm going to be installing this, which is a rollover protection bar. It's not an MSA approved bar, it's what's called a show bar, but the idea is that you mount this and you can adjust the height, and then there's another section that goes the other side and a jointing piece in between, so it's to look like a roll cage. It's not a proper roll cage, it's not a proper rollover bar, it's a show unit, but it's actually quite well made. It's good thick steel, it's 2.5mm thick wall tube. Once I've got the dimensions and positioning correct, I can weld it all together so it'll be a single piece unit. And even though it's not an MSA spec bar, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot stronger than a 53-year-old Austin car. So I've made a box here. This is 3mm plate, and a 3mm plate that will be welded to the floor to spread the load. So should it go over, I just think that that bar has a better chance of supporting the weight of the car and stopping it crushing my head than 55-year-old tin plate car. So that is going to be the next challenge, to deal with that. What I need to do is get all the crust and crud off it first, get rid of the old repairs, have a good look underneath to see what the state is from underneath as well, and then I can decide whether to patch the bad bits or just cut the whole thing out and put a complete panel in. At the moment, that's what I'm leaning towards. The only place I've found so far that I can get a replacement floor pan is the Austin A43 in our owners club, which I'm not a member of. I can find plenty of the rear panels, but the only place I found that stocks these front floor pans is the Farina Owners Club. So I may end up joining that and doing that job completely, which I do think is the way it's likely to go. Now, I've also been having some fun recently with power plant. That's the engine that's in Morty at the moment. That's a bog standard 1098 Morris Minor engine. That's the one that got me out of trouble last year and took a kicking all year, and just keeps on ticking. Not very powerful, about 40 horsepower, 45 maybe, but it works well. It's done the job. But as I said earlier in an earlier video, the blue engine that came with the car, the plan was to rebore it to give more capacity and therefore more power, and rebuild it and put that in. So to that end, I took the block away to a company in Shrewsbury for a rebore, and on the first cylinder they were boring, they broke through into just a random pocket in the casting. Shouldn't even be there, just a flaw in the casting. So that block eventually effectively became scrap. So I've been having a lot of fun. I managed to pick up two 998 A series short motors. This is the second one. This is actually an A plus, so I shouldn't really be using this. This one was seized solid, so there's a bit of work to deal with that one. The other one is an early straightforward A series, which I can use, which has now gone to the engineering works to be rebored. It's been with them several days now and I haven't heard anything untoward, so I'm hoping that no news is good news, and pretty soon I should have an engine block back that I can build up to make a decent motor out of. Right, so these are the components of the old rear bumper. That's the main section. As you can see, it's a bit pitted and scarred. These are the overriders. That one's rotted through from the back, so that one's pretty much scrap. That one's not bad. The chrome is a little bit untidy, but generally that's not bad. And these are the two end pieces, so these go down the sides. And that's where I'm having trouble. These brackets, those bolt and nut, it's a nut and bolt through, but it's not a proper headed bolt, it's a chrome dome bolt. So I can't grip that, and the threads are so crusted up with a combination of rust and underseal and God knows what, that I can't get the nuts off yet. So I'm going to sandblast them to try and get the threads cleaned up. I'll show you the new bumper, the new GRP unit. So those are the two side sections that go around the side. Obviously I've got a drill to mount the brackets and drill holes to bolt the whole thing together, and that's the main one, and so that will go like so. And apart from being rust free, it's quite a bit lighter than the steel bumpers, so that's a nice saving. The only downside is they don't do the overriders in GRP, and I think the steel overriders, even with these painted chrome, it's not quite perfect chrome finish. It'll be a reasonable bright silver finish, not quite shiny as chrome. So I think the chrome steel bumper overriders against the painted GRP is going to look a bit odd. So what I plan to do is take a mould off the best of the four overriders. I say four because there's a pair on the front bumper as well, and they're identical. All four overriders are exactly the same parts. So if I pick the best one of the four and make a mould from it, I can then make my own GRP fiberglass, or maybe even carbon fibre, although that's probably a bit over the top. GRP would do the job nicely, all painted the same colour silver, and they should look the part. But equally as important is it adds up to a fairly good weight saving. So that's pretty much where we are with that. If I spin you around, this is the sandblasting cabinet. If you're going to do any sandblasting, don't buy one of these. This lid is rubbish. It's just a thin piece of perspex, and it just has two simple latches, one either side, to clamp it down. When you pull the trigger of the gun inside, it puts air pressure inside. The air pressure lifts the corners and blows the dust out. So it's not a sealed unit. So if you've got one of these, you need a good respirator mask. You need to get as fully sealed in your clothing as you can, because the sand and the dust gets everywhere. I'm using kiln dried sand. You can use bicarbonate of soda, brilliant for soft metals, aluminium, carburetor bodies, in throttle injection bodies, manifolds, things like that, because it doesn't harm the base metal. It will strip paint off, it will strip rust off, but it won't mark the aluminium. So bicarb soda is a great starting point for stuff like that. When you're dealing with rusty components like this that have got 55 years worth of paint and crud and road dirt, salt and rust and God knows what else on them, you need something a bit more abrasive, which is why I'm using sand. I'm just using straightforward kiln dried sand from the builder's merchant, nothing special. You do have to bear in mind when you're blasting, either with bicarb of soda or with sand, or with glass bead if you choose to use glass bead. Every time one of those particles meets something solid, like the metal that you're blasting, it shatters and gets smaller. Now this applies to glass bead, sand, bicarb of soda, whatever. Anything crystalline like that, the particles get smaller and smaller and smaller until it's very fine powder, like flour. And the problem is that it doesn't strip very much then. So periodically you need to change the sand, or glass bead, or bicarb. You need to put fresh material in that's got some bite to it. So that's where I am at the moment. I'm just about to put some fresh sand in this. I've had this a good few years. The gloves have torn a little bit around here, so they're taped up. It really needs new gloves. But to be honest, I just can't be bothered spending any money on this one. I'd rather buy a new, better cabinet. One with a completely sealed window and a side door for loading the parts in that you want to clean. But this is what I've got, so this is what I'll be using. Okay, so after a couple of hours in the blasting cabinet, we've now got the bumper components pretty much cleaned. There's the bumper mounting irons. They're a bit tired, they're a bit bent. This one in particular, that is twisted compared to that. I don't know if you can see the difference, it's a bit difficult to show. So there's a bit of remedial work needed on these to tidy them up. Those 4 little brackets, they are shaped to go into the bumper itself, so they're just spacers, so they're fine. Those 2 are the corner piece mountings on the ends. I ended up having to cut the bolts off because the nuts wouldn't undo, and I've cut through the bracket there, so that just needs welding up. That's not a big problem. These are the jointing plates that joint the side bars to the rear bar of the bumper, and they bolt through. That one's got a sheared off bolt, that bolt's bent, the plate's a bit twisted, and that stud is a bit crappy. That one has been bodged before, that bolt is missing, those nuts have been snotted on, and the bracket's bent and twisted. So I think the best thing to do with those 2 is to make a new pair with some new bolts. So that'll be for another day. But that's about it. So got all those components done. Once I've made those and welded that, we're good to go with reassembling the bumper. Yeah. One success. The number plate light, stripped, cleaned, remade it, put new studs in, so that's all good to go. New bulbs. That's about it for today. Not a lot more I can do now. I'm waiting for the engine block to come back, and then I can get on with the engine build. I can get these brackets made. I'm not going to do that now, I'm running out of time. So that's a job for another day. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you next time.